welcome everybody to another edition of Leap Wave Sound, the place where we talk with experimental musicians, improvisers, and sound artists. Today it's a pleasure to have Alice Hui-Sheng Chang with us. She's a sound improviser, experimental vocalist, and also an experiential arts therapist based in Tainan, in Taiwan. So welcome, Alice. How are you doing?
G'day. Pretty good.
Good. Nice to have you here. So just to set the stage, I think it's important to highlight that the development of experimental music in Taiwan occurred under very unique circumstances. So following half a century of like martial law, essentially, the 90s saw like a remarkable surge in creative expression. And this is a phenomenon that was documented by different people. I remember an article that Jeff Lowe wrote for White Fungus that is called Wasteland Utopia, in which he chronicles this very interesting period. So you were born in 1984, if I'm correct. So you were perhaps pretty young, like to experience all of that. But I was wondering, like, do you recall like any early experiences, such as like, shows, records, or any other kinds of encounters that kind of like sparked your interest, like in experimental music and these more unconventional sound approaches, let's call it?
Yeah, actually pretty limited. Like I guess when I was in high school, maybe like it's kind of not exactly experimental, but I've discovered the music of Summer Lei Guangxia, and she is still actually quite active. And at that time, she was publishing kind of mix of field recording, some electronic stuff with her popular. She's a singer-songwriter, and she also kind of writes, quite unconventional lyrics, sometimes with quite sort of different period of poetries. But I think the rest of my discovery is mostly when I started studying sound in Australia.
Because of course you moved to Melbourne later. I think you completed, like, you went there to study university, I guess, after. Right. So there, when you moved to Australia, like to this place, I was wondering, like, what effect moving to this new kind of environment had on you, like the way you conceived like your artistic practice, or like the opportunities the place presented for you, like how things change in that sense.
So initially I was studying quite a general art and design course, including English language, just for half a year, sort of like a bridging course, because we finished summer here, but they still got a half a year until summer. And at that time, I kind of got really into people watching. So I would sit at a train station and just watch people. And initially, I was living in quite a Chinese suburb. So very mixed dialect, mix of different Chinese dialect, as well as, of course, English. And just remember sort of really interested in human interaction. And I think this really connects to my practice even now. It's sort of more about how we connect to cross culture and how we communicate also. And perhaps it's sort of maybe more about human being, or even cross, like beyond human being, how we connect to others.
In that particular, because I guess you were exposed like to different. I've never been to Australia personally, unfortunately, but I guess it's also like a very multicultural kind of environment, like in which you have like all those different encounters with people from different places. Was there like a so-called like experimental scene, like not only for music, but like in general, like for performance arts? Like, did you have the opportunity of like like seeing artists in that particular place that inspired you or that wanted you to like discover more about certain disciplines?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, Melbourne, I was based in.
Yeah.
I was there on and off for 11 years,
Wow.
over a degree and 2 other master degrees. And for sure, the scene is very healthy, all kinds of experimental or interdisciplinary,
Yeah.
so not just music, all kind of collaboration, from impro to very composed or very derived theater or different kind of whatever you called kind of performance or
Yeah,
exhibition,
sometimes it's just something.
presentation projects. Yeah, for sure. It's still I'm still quite connected. I've still got projects that is involving go back every year or two. Yeah, the scene is pretty healthy in terms of like maybe in my early years I was studying also, so the course I was in, which is called media arts at that time, and I started doing video and kind of moved into sound later. And so when I started presenting pieces of work that I recorded at home, I was immediately asked to play live with people. So people are interested in, you've recorded some of your voice. Why don't you play improvisation with us? So quite quickly, I think in the first year, I started performing and improvising on stage.
Right. So it might sound like a silly question, but why the voice? I mean, everybody has a voice. We all do, but like not everybody like explores like the expressive possibilities of the voice. So why you saw that as your instrument, or like was it early that you discovered, oh, I want to work with my voice? I can see what I can do with it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I was 17 years old, alone in a foreign land and just watching people and kind of like when I got into art course, I wasn't even sure how I got in. Anyway, I put together some kind of portfolio of mixed Taiwanese pop and field recording tape.
Interesting.
And I started kind of making work at home more in the first year, because also it was quite daunting to try to think of different projects to work with people. I mean, everyone started as like, maybe not everyone, but most people started as bedroom artists, right? So I was making recordings of all the things that make sound in the house.
Oh yeah, I can relate to that. Certainly.
Yeah, it's like more like things that I found quite conversational. So I actually lived in a noisy old apartment, so every door squeaked differently, and every water tap screams differently. So I started like playing with how they interact with each other, and they all sound super human. So I started adding my own interaction to them, and somehow, I guess initially I was communicating with the house, and then people asked me to play together. In the first improv group, I was playing with cellist and guitarist, and guitarist is from more underground rock, different kind of experiment background. Cellist is sort of more classical trained, but also not conventional. So we really didn't use language to start with. We were really just exploring all kinds of mimicking palettes with each other. And then I think initially it was quite spontaneous. And then it became kind of a bit of a reflection, maybe after a couple of years of performing. I'm like, why? Yeah, like
Why are
why?
we doing this?
Why don't I expand? I mean, I did expand sometimes
Right.
to different objects or toys, but then I still come back to voice.
Voice.
And I just found it, perhaps like now kind of reflecting on it, I was really interested in finding a way to connect people around me, which I found language really frustrating,
Right.
of course,
Sure.
and limiting. You might have that experience in Taiwan.
Sometimes, yeah. I do. Sure.
So yeah, I found this other method where when we were improvising, it was really direct and spontaneous and was really rich also in terms of, I mean, I discover how rich it could be.
Sure. Yeah. Was there any point in which you said, because like you made we could say a conscious choice, or like just to focus on the voice and its expressive possibilities? Was there any point in which you started like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to people who did this in the past, like with vocal extended techniques, like this tradition that obviously like extends through the 20th century? I'm thinking about like, different artists that use the voice like in more unconventional ways. Like, were you paying attention to all those kinds of things, or you were just trying to find your own way without like paying too much attention like to this kind of stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I found many great diva. They're all divas, and they're all great like theatrical presentation as
Right.
well, like not just vocal complexity, but
Right.
but also like amazing multi-sensory
Sure.
stage storyteller, not with language. And like actually my favorite vocalist is from Spain.
I know who she is. Fatima Miranda, right?
Yeah, she is like, when I met her, she's just this incredible energy and incredible diva.
Right. When did you discover her exactly? Like,
I think probably quite soon when I was performing, maybe like in the first half a year. Actually, it was my husband Nigel. He found it in a secondhand music store under World Music.
Right.
And so like I think the album cover was like a knife through her head.
Wow.
And it sounded really intriguing. And actually that might be a second album we got, but the first one, it was like full of all kind of graphic score, and the score was like 20, sometimes over 20 layers of notations, but all with her own voice. And the notations just amazing. So I started listening to her, and I think in the early days I also was listening to Changhua, Nanchinlak, and she was really like Lost Rivers, that particular album. I was just listening to it yesterday too, because I was preparing a talk. So like that was really also I guess not so much the throat singing. I mean, of course, quite like beautiful throat singing, but a lot of the tracks were like, it was actually, the album was made, I think, from post her parents. I'm not sure, maybe accident or passing, and also a lot of changes in her life. And so it was sort of like an album dedicated to family.
Right.
And so each track was, some tracks was like super deeply emotional and very, very raw. And that was kind of probably the other end, whereas Fatima is like very constructive, very crafted, very architecturally complex. And also she studied Indian tradition, so it's quite a Indian Tuvan anyway, slightly different tradition, but both like really amazing singing tradition. And then they've they've also converted it to something completely new.
Mm-hmm. So you had the chance of meeting her later. You said, well, how was the experience of like meeting your idol? We could say because it has
Yeah,
to be like very interesting. You know, a person you admire so much that you have the chance of like. How was?
I've actually met both of them, but Sanho very, very brief. Just post concert gave her a CD saying this won't work. I don't even know what happened to that. And yeah, like Fatima, I I I let me think. I firstly met her and then went to one of her concerts also in a different city in Spain, and saw the full concert presentation. That was incredible. But yeah, when we first met her, I think I firstly back in the days of MySpace, I firstly sent her
MySpace,
my
wow.
music. And then this was like 2009. And I sent her some of my albums, music, and then she was happy to meet up for a meal, and she just took us to, tapas.
Oh wow! Yeah, of course.
So she took us to like so many restaurants and just ate a dish. And when we first saw her, she was wearing this giant bowl, like a mini mouse.
Really?
It was like maybe this big. It was like bigger than her head.
Whoa.
And we were just like, it was like a statement, just on the street, not even in the theater. And yeah, like she was super, super generous, but yeah, I don't even remember what conversation we had. Very daily, very simple also because of the language. But like really incredible, generous, energy as well.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that was in 2009. I think in 2010, I think it was, you were in Spain as well, because I remember one of those recordings that I listened. It was a festival, I think, in Santander or someplace like that, I think.
Yeah, it was in 2009 as well.
Yeah. So I remember when I was when I met with Nigel. I mean, I was obviously asking him some questions like, what was your experience like in Spain? Obviously, because I mean, I don't know if things have changed too much, but at that time, like traditionally, Spain hasn't been like a very active place in terms of, like, of course, there's always things, but it was always like difficult to find opportunities, like, or festivals or things like that. So how did you find the the chance to go there?
Yeah, actually, the festival was curated by Elios, who is Greek, and his wife is Spanish. So he, I don't remember how we connect to him.
Right.
But we've known him for years and exchanged music, and we've also hosted him in Taiwan. He's also used my voice samples for his album. I mean, we maybe met through some festival, I think, in Europe, and then later on got involved in this one.
Right.
And that was a very rich town,
Santander. Yeah, I've never been there personally, but it's in the north. So the north is very. I'm from South Spain, so it's kind of like different. I haven't been there, but I would like to, because I think it's a very interesting place. Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare to have experimental music there. I mean, we were really just a group of, like, we were walking around this beach, beautiful, sunny city. Everyone was wearing colorful clothes, myself. And then all other guys are wearing black. And you can see this like black musician like, really? Like walking around the city completely like unfitting. And a lot of the concert we had quite mixed audience, like very, very mixed from young to quite older, very well-dressed middle-class ladies. I remember one concert was Zev, the percussionist,
Seth, yeah, sure.
and he was playing this massive gong. And then I was just like, I could hear percussion behind me at the far back, and I was like, what is that? And I could see some shadow like on the wall also moving. And I turned around, was like this sort of, quite kind of middle class lady. She has a few like beautiful bangles all through her arm, and she had a fan, and she was just fanning herself at the back, and her bangle was going like like nonstop, and so it's kind of like a compliment to the
Right, there was this.
Yeah, that was like a really like vivid memory. Kind of like I guess like we were really, I think Ilios was really like putting this on quite especially.
Sure.
Wasn't like a regular thing.
So I guess you have toured a lot, like pretty much everywhere, but in Europe specifically. So because this is the thing, you know, because when I was living in Spain, then I was like in different places, like in Paris, London, like many Barcelona as well. I was living there in Spain, but I always wondered, like, because I moved away from there pretty early, so I never got to experience like how like this kind of music was received and played in Europe in general. So what was your experience like coming from Taiwan, Australia? Like what was your experience of Europe like when it came to this particular environment of like experimental music and also the kind of stuff that you were doing?
I mean, like you say, Europe is diverse, so it's difficult to say Europe. But for sure, we've been to many bigger cities.
Right.
Where there is a very healthy scene, and there are a lot of musicians, and there are regular gigs. So we played at more regular gigs. I mean, less like an events like Santander where it's like really new audience. But some for sure, like we might be crashing a more like a rock concert or some kind of more like conventional club scene, or maybe. Oh, in Paris, we've also played at a bubble tea shop, Pearl
Bubble
Milk
tea. that's
Taiwanese lady. We made a sound installation there. For my voice, and I think that was probably pretty new for the kind of audience there, which is probably a lot of Taiwanese also.
Right.
I mean, for regular series. There's people are generally pretty open to, because they get a lot of people touring through.
Right.
So probably more regularly people would play their set rather than collaborate.
Sure.
Whereas in Taiwan, it's probably more common that like, you know, internationals come to Taiwan and collaborate or want to collaborate.
Sure.
And so in Taiwan, like over the last decade, we've hosted musicians where we would also put on collaborative sets. But in Europe, maybe I was doing more of like for me also, besides kind of conventional gig, I'm also interested in how I connect with audience. So often I would go into the audience and sit inside the audience and kind of like soak up the atmosphere there. And each venue would feel really different. Same as each group. For sure, some more challenging ones might be like the more noisy bars where people are really not there for music. Or there's often also interesting like echoey space, like in France we've played at some underground caves, so sailors, and the reverbs are really great. And probably also for me, I'm also always seeking for different acoustic spaces where I would play with also the space. So when I do solo or when I do improvisation with other musicians, I also really think about the acoustic play, and also the movement around the space, and also the movement in the audience. So for me, like, during the tours, like these are really wonderful to always be inspired by new situations.
Sure.
I think the most fancy one we had is in Switzerland. Switzerland, where they had like amazing food and platters, and there was also like a rotating set of, also there was some people doing live soundtrack for film, negative film or film painting. I can't quite remember. And then like in between every set, people will like also eat and like also just chat, and for sure, like that kind of situation, people get to social a lot more, and spending quite a long afternoon together.
Right. I think the social aspect is really important, and in time I came to understand, like, of course, like performing, when you perform solo and you perform with other people, I mean it's a very different experience. Like the dynamics, the interactions are totally different. But especially when it comes like to improvised music, I think it's a collective kind of enterprise. I mean, at least this is the way I see it. Even if you're improvising solo, there's always, like, of course, as you mentioned, like the interaction with the audience is absolutely essential as well, because different from other kinds of music. I mean, each kind of music has its own thing, but I feel like in improvised music, and this is something that I was reading about. I was reading a book about improvisation recently by David Toop, which is called Into the Maelstrom. It's a pretty nice book, and he talks about this thing, like in improvisation, you have to follow. I mean, you cannot just like tune out. Like you have to pay attention to what's going on. There's like this active component of listening, which is absolutely essential. So you, as an artist, like when you perform solo and when you perform with other people, it's like you have like different mindsets, or like you like how does it work for you essentially? Because I've talked to many people about that, and I got like wildly different answers. So in particular, in your particular case, because also like you're working with voice, and this is one of the things that he also mentions in the book, is like the relationship that people have with their voice as improvisers is not the same as when you play with electronics or with an instrument. Like there's not this degree of mediation. I mean, it's your body, it's your resonant space. So how do you experience it from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess I've sort of already described it as raw or direct, and for sure these are quite central for the practice of voice.
Right.
But also I work with embodiments a lot, and it is also another really difficult to describe sort of happenings. And also, like in my art space in Tainan, we've hosted some symposium, just really also trying to unpack some of these different states when artists are performing. I feel like when I am performing, I mean, I'm really interested in dreams, and I'm really interested in unconscious. So it kind of like is about like how to maybe for me the first step is to relax my consciousness,
right?
And which include a lot of habitual responding.
Sure.
So sometimes, like when I hear other musicians sound, or when I sort of sense the situation, I have maybe quite a habitual sound coming out, and I'll be like, okay, hold on, hold off. And it's not so much a thinking process,
right?
Well, kind of, but it's more like just sometimes waiting for something else to resurface,
sure,
rather than taking the sort of more the initial initial response, reflex, maybe.
Sure.
And then like when the consciousness is more relaxed, it's sort of like enter, like maybe it's a bit like what Buddha does, like 80% eyes closed and just 20% open.
Open, yeah.
So kind of like enter that state of only it is super open, I think, like, but not with eyes. So the senses, especially hearing, of course, I could really sense like everything in the space here, also the sound outside of the space, or connect to what is the flow in the space. And then sometimes I do also go into eye contact with audience. So I would
really?
eye contact different audiences, and because this is the medium how we connect.
Right.
We human use voice to communicate. So I am essentially doing this on stage also without language. So I see myself as, I'm there to connect with these people, with this space, with this all the parallel spaces that is in this space, and letting the unconscious flow in a different. It's not exactly a smooth flow. There's a kind of a lot of self-reflection as well. So there's sort of a lot of level of checking in myself, but flowing, but not with that kind of like critical mind, but more of a bodily sense.
Yeah. Also, I think like expectations also play a critical role. I mean, in the sense like what you're expecting, like to get from this particular situation, like when you relax and when you like try to let go of those, like perhaps that's when the really interesting stuff happens, like when you don't try to impose those preconceptions that you have. Of course, things flow in a different way, as you said before. So another aspect that, you already mentioned that you basically started out like by paying attention to your immediate surroundings and try to record those sounds and interact with them in different ways. So obviously, and this is something you've mentioned. I mean, I read it somewhere, like in one of those internet interviews, probably, that your voice is obviously shaped by the environment, like by the place where you find yourself. And this is, you've obviously also done like lots of like site specific work in many different locations. I was thinking, for instance, of this work that you did with Nigel and with Yannick Dobie. I forgot the title. It's a pretty long title. It's but I think it's in Chang, right? I think I remember that. So incorporating the field recordings and like engaging with this space. So I wanted to know, like, more generally, I think you have already touched upon that to a certain extent, but what is the relationship in your practice between space and sound? How do you conceive that, and how do you like try to translate it like through your work, essentially, in its many different ways?
There are many layers to any space.
Too many.
and maybe sometimes I do feel like there are too many that I can't choose.
Right.
For sure, like what is immediate is the acoustic and the smell, or like the physical layout of the space, the present in that present moment. And of course there is that the history of the space, or the social, the different layers of meaning related to that space. And sometimes something might be quite overpowering to others, such as and of course the soundscape. So what's audible in that space besides the acoustic. So sometimes for sure it's a quiet space, especially indoors, but often I also perform outdoors in like botanic garden, wetland, different kind of very active space.
Right.
And so in that instance, perhaps like the soundscape becomes more dominating than the acoustic, because the voice is kind of spread. So I might be working more with the living creatures, with the soundscape, also the living human beings in that space, all the audiences. Whereas maybe like Chang projects, a lot of it is like small shops, and each shop has a different history, maybe quite intense smell. So sometimes those become the dominant features of that space. And whereas maybe some space, the acoustic is the dominant feature, like I've recorded quite a few times in bathrooms or caves or a kiln, like a ceramic kiln, like a dome of different sorts. So the acoustic become maybe more important, but not to say like usually some of those spaces, the history are also very, very rich. So while playing with the acoustic, I might be also thinking and channeling the history and the emotion of that history, again through embodiment. So starting from the body, of course there is a comprehension, but for me maybe it comes back to how I'm experiencing this in my body. But yeah, like sometimes it is an exploration as I improvise, as I play. So I will walk through the space, I guess, very much about the materiality as well. What is the actual surfaces made of? The floor, the walls, the windows, like the different reflection surfaces, and I might actually go and explore this different diversity of reflection and echoes. Sometimes it could be also exploring even the infrastructure, like the shelves, the cabinets, I play with quite a lot of hallway or stairwell, or kind of like a walkway, undercover walkway as well, which also is that acoustic, but then it's also the function that really interests us. Like Nigel and I recorded a lot of kind of channels, walkways, stairwells in Krems in Austria for residency, where also for our music we see our music as something that is constantly traveling, like no end, but a constant traveling somewhere. So yeah, that sometimes that becomes what's interesting for us.
I understand. So there's another concept that obviously has been touched on, like especially like during the 20th century. I'm thinking like perhaps the most important figure in that sense was John Cage, when he talked about silence, like the notion of silence, which is obviously very important. Also his piece like 433, which opens up this whole space of investigation, essentially, like for environmental sounds, what is music, what is not music, essentially. But like if you take a look, I mean, he's basically taking all these concepts from things such as like, because he was obviously influenced by like Japanese Zen, and also like by all this environment of ideas, which is actually millenary. And in my particular engagement with these kinds of concepts, which I was very interested in, like Chinese, you talk about, for instance, Chinese painting. I remember a reference you made to that. There's so many interesting parallelisms here that like lead you to thinking about like this notion of what is actually the role of silence in music, and how does it interact with sound as a more general kind of phenomenon. So you like, especially I'm always curious, like for people who actually come like from this kind of like cultural milieu, because we don't really have anything similar, like coming from Europe or from other traditions. So what is your, because you also mentioned like this kind of Buddha almost like state. So what is your approach? Like what is your engagement with this tradition of like thinking about sound from this perspective, also in relationship with painting, with all those different disciplines that have such a long history? Because I'm interested, like how you see those connections from your perspective.
There's a lot there. I'm just thinking what to start with. I mean, I don't think it's only an Eastern philosophy. I mean,
No,
I
for
was
sure.
in Italy and kind of northern Italy, and there was a lake there where there's a monastery on the island, and I heard that is that monastery hosts maybe over 100 nuns, and it's a silent
The vow of silence,
monastery.
that's totally present.
And I was just like amazed that there's over 100 people living there, and they do not talk like the rest of their life. And that was such a shocking concept, like and yeah, in France I was lucky to hear 4 minutes 33 live, played by a traveling musician, maybe a US traveling musician, I can't remember now. And was maybe about 50, 60 audience.
Right.
And, for sure, there's no silence. There's like so much sound. But there's also actually, the score is actually, quite a few steps of actions. So
sure. Close the lid of the piano, that's it. Yeah, it's a score actually. Yeah,
and like the human presence on the stage.
Sure.
And even though we know what the piece is, we're all just staring at that human presence on the stage the whole time, while trying to check out other audiences around us,
the reaction to the whole thing. Yeah.
Quiet while hearing our own bodily
heartbeat,
and the chairs, but yeah, like it was a regional gallery, so also could hear quite a lot of beautiful soundscape outside.
From the outside,
and maybe for me, like it's well, kind of come back to John Cage silence. For me, it's not about silence. It's about connecting to the environment, where I do also use it a lot in my performance, because it's not an ongoing machine.
Sure.
And I have to have silence, and I use actually really long silences, like for solo or for any collaboration, where I would listen to the silence. And at the same time, I mean, many pieces I recorded, like my newest album, recorded all through Brussels streets, Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland, yeah.
And
beautiful.
For me, maybe sometimes I see my voice as a medium only. So it's not about listening to my voice, but when I'm sounding out the public spaces, it's about how I can then connect people to listen to this acoustic. So I make a sound, and it's more about listening to acoustic here. It's more about then after that finish, you're listening to the soundscape. So I'm just like a balloon popping. How people test acoustic, pop a balloon. So I see sometimes when I'm performing in public spaces where sometimes the voice is just a medium to connect to the environment, to connect to all the sounds that is around us, including actual sounds, including their musicality or their acoustic, their relationship, all the sound possibilities to listen to. And I guess like, I mean, silence is part of sound, like for music. So like you do notate silence. So even though I don't notate, but I for sure use it as a sound. And I'm not just listening to silence, but I'm listening to what's now in the space. And sometimes when I'm performing with other people, I guess it's also a time to just reconnect. What's happening now? What has the performance moved onto? Yeah, I mean, the couple of times where it's probably forbidden was, I think, when one time I was invited to submit something to the radio. And then they
don't like silences in radio.
Edit out the silence because it's a radio mistake. And I'm like, I can't edit out the silence in my track. I was like, what? That's not possible. You can get other musicians like can continue to make sound because that's not voice. Yeah, that was quite funny. I can't remember what happened at the end. Maybe I submitted a different track, but it was like maybe recorded in a noisy space where the water was running. I can't remember now. Yeah. And I actually remember when I was at uni, maybe the last year, one of my professor came to my concert, and then after the concert, he told me that he think the silences in my performance are really important or something like that. And that was the sort of probably quite early on that I was like firstly thinking, does he mean he doesn't like my voice? Like the silence is better? What does it mean? Like the silence are really like more important, really important in the performances. And yeah, I think later on I really like understood actually that space also gives the audience, like not just me, but also the audience to reconnect or the reality, kind of like a construction of, okay, where are we? What's around here? What's happening there? What am I feeling? And then sometimes also gives an expectation, like the audience are actually composing themselves. So they started to make music themselves in their own mind. And I think that is very much also coming back to John Cage, where it is all, I mean, yeah, I'm actually not super connected to I Ching, where that is often used in John Cage theory, but
the
more in
Chang's
style.
components,
Like I'm more interested in maybe like the simple concept of Tao, where everything has Tao, everything has its own cyclical, its own function, not function. Everything has its own way of being, and that includes like every single thing in the whole world and
the 10,000 things, as they say.
I think for me that sense of equalization of like not putting human first, not a sort of human dominant humanistic kind of view on the world is also probably quite central to my work, where I've become kind of through many collaboration of like being asked to become bird, become plants talking, becomes like many different non-human entity representing their voice. and yeah, that's sort of like a challenging state through many projects and through many ways of how to not be a human kind of practice.
Yeah. The becomings of becoming like potentially so many different things, puts you in a totally different perspective. We've been talking about connections a lot. So actually, we have a common connection. Well, we have plenty of common connections, but one of them was last year, because I don't know if you know, I came to Taiwan for the first time August 2023 last year, and I had my first performance here in Hsinchu in Yanshan Yigazuo. So the first person I performed with was actually Cheryl Chang, like the one that asked you so many of the questions that I read just to get ready for this. And the other person that performed was Jason Khan. So that was my first performance here. I was with those two people, and I think it should have been like maybe a couple of days later. He was there in Tainan with you recording. I smile when the sound is singing through space. so I just wanted. I was very curious about like this because you also obviously collaborated with Jason before. So he's obviously one of those like very important figures in the scene of experimental music. He's been like for almost like 30 years. So I wanted to know it more. I wanted to know more because that's in his particular case, he's also using the voice. I mean, he uses many different instruments, but in this particular case, he was using the voice as well. Like in both collaborations you've done with him, I think the voice was the main instrument. So how was that interaction with somebody? Because when you're in a circumstance when you have other instruments and you're playing with the environment, all these different kinds of things, but how is it when you actually have another voice like to play with? How was the experience? How did you approach? Because you made a recording, so I was also interested, like how that recording take place. Was it a purely improvisation, or like did you have like some ideas beforehand that later on you, yeah?
So yeah, Jason does not like to talk first.
Right.
So we can't talk first.
No discussion.
So
no.
We made 2 albums over the last many decades. I think I can't remember. The last one might be 2010. And this one just now. Was not that long ago. I can't remember when the first one was out. It felt like a long time ago, and that was in Australia. I mean, yeah, like some touring musician we met at different points, and it's really nice to kind of like reconnect what's changed, what's and for sure, like you say, voice are quite direct.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite improvisation are with other vocalists. I love meeting other vocalists and improvising together, and so it's such a precious connection. And for me, like playing with Jason's vocal palette it's a super contrasting play. So I mean, the first album already felt like that, and this time, like also he's been living in our art space for a month, and we did the album quite towards the end, the recording. And we just sat down face to face, side by side, and see what happens. It's an edited excerpt at the end over 2 or 3 improv sessions over a couple of days. And many way of responding to each other, for sure, like many kind of spontaneous contrast or follows or mimicking or kind of going on our own tour and coming back.
Yeah.
And but voice can be an instant mimicking response. Whereas maybe when people are playing different instrument, you can't, like, you can
Takes
only
longer, like, to
kind of mimic. Yeah. So when something kind of locks in, or something kind of, I mean, whatever is happening, it is constantly conversation. I mean, even though we are listening to it like music, but we are also constantly having that conversation. So it is really kind of come back to that folk tradition of call and response. Sometimes that type of responding is immediate, or coming back to accompaniment. I mean, coming back to storytelling often as well, or kind of sometimes channeling different traditions that we have quite separately. And voice does have that culture and phonetics, pronunciation kind of differences as well. So in many aspects, I see it as like quite a contrast play. Yeah, and also for me, his vocal quality, that really kind of slightly kind of quite focused on throats and rusty.
Yeah, like more guttural kind of.
Quality has also quite a contrast to the way I use kind of breath to drive.
It's quite a contrast, especially like, because also if you listen like to other of your works, like many works that you have released, but for instance the ones with Rosalind Hall, in which she's playing the saxophone, or the ones like with the Dotalim musicians, like that's a totally different kind of like environments, a totally different kind of context. So yeah, I guess you also have to adjust like the nature and of the improvisation, and the nature of the interaction is very different, like in those different contexts, you know, because like the set of circumstances is pretty different, right? So
I mean, like sometimes in festivals we meet a group of vocalists, and I remember like one festival in China, Hangzhou. At the end of that 10-hour noise festival, there's quite a few vocalists from different countries, from like China, Taiwan, Korea, I think, and maybe someone else. Yeah, and like we sort of like came together suggesting, okay, let's do a vocal play. And so like everyone has a very different culture background, and I think that culture background came through in terms of like, for sure, like some people are more also have that musical culture background, like pop or jazz. Like jazz vocalists have a very different way of using their voice, and like screamers have different way of using their voice. And like still like in that wave of differences, we were really easily picking up each other's conversation and following it, and very easily also mimicking each other. So it's it's certainly like a really quick ball game.
Right. Right. So in 2014, you completed a master's in therapeutic arts. So this is also one of the aspects that I wanted to talk about. And obviously, since then, like one of your main activities has been like consisted in organizing workshops, like with different age groups, and doing work with them. So I've never been to one of those, unfortunately. So I'm definitely curious about what kind of activities do you usually do during those sessions, and like what sorts of dynamics do you want to activate or to generate among the participants when that happens?
I mean, come back to maybe using non-language based voice. For me, I mean, firstly, it breaks the cultural boundary.
Right.
And this culture could be many things. Like culture could be countries, language. Culture could be the social economic dynamic. Culture could be different disability culture, different age group culture. And it breaks those boundaries to also free up the expressions. So I mean, for many people, they find it really free just to be able to kind of use their body fluently. And to play with breath, to feel the breath, to play with energies and noises. Where I think many of my favorites are to work with people who are particularly nonverbal. Like we say nonverbal, but non-lingual. So people who does not actually able to use language to express, and they play with voice and find that. I think many times some of these people with different kind of disability, they actually their voices are actually viewed as kind of forbidden noises. They being shut up to not express that way. But then to kind of like play with their voice so freely, it really release a lot of kind of, I mean, just think about every children before they can express language, they use all different kind of noises to express their emotions. And same as any adult who have trouble in language. And the other group is probably like older, especially female, where many part of their life they've been
silenced,
vocal, but not listened to. Like especially many moms, they've been talking their whole life a lot, but actually not really listened. So in that context, like one is to really freely play with different kind of dramatic expressions, but then in another thing that is more memorable for them from their expression to me after is in the improvisation. So in improvisation, we enter a very open listening state. So everyone are super non-judgmental and also non-critical to like, are you making a beautiful voice, or are you able to sing, are you able to actually find a word to express? I mean, we all go through all this frustration in life, but to kind of get rid of all those social limits or frustrations, really just freely listen to each other, and tends to be copied, to be heard by others, and to be copied back, to be resonating, or to be kind of harmonized or disharmonized, in many ways, creating the social bond quite instantly with a group of strangers. That's really beautiful to witness. So these are quite vocal based, but I also, when I work with art, maybe it's with any medium. So I also often use visual arts, use body, use posture, gesture, use embodiment, sensation, use different kind of noticing of surroundings.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Just like conceiving the whole body as a whole, which I think is one of the most important things, because obviously the voice is part of all those interconnected systems that we have in our bodies, and like becoming aware and becoming active. I think it's one of the most essential things we can do nowadays, certainly, and to give people the opportunity, especially as you said, like people who have been silenced, who have been told not to speak, given that that chance is absolutely precious in a way. So that's really beautiful.
And some
Uh,
like
so-
yeah, sorry, just a note, like sometimes you can hear, especially with older
Mhm.
voices, like their voices like they talk like this,
Doesn't come
and
out yeah, fully.
their voices, yeah, like super muted
Mhm.
already. And yeah, like sometimes it's really beautiful to hear that voice to be
Come
kind
out
of coming
strongly.
out with, projecting out with
Right. Yeah.
something powerful and energetic.
Right. So I guess many, I don't know if all of those, but most of these workshops or many of these workshops you organize in Tinshuo, like in your space, or do you also organize them like somewhere else, like in some other spaces? I guess yes, right?
Yeah, often now I more often run it somewhere else, but it's by
Ah,
invitation. So
right.
different groups, so some are student, university, theater groups,
Hmm.
some are just different social um, groups,
Centers.
social like NGO, NPO
Hmm.
groups.
Right.
Mm.
Right. So last year I was able to visit Tinshu. I hadn't been there, so Nigel was kind enough to show us the place. It was really awesome to be there, because I had actually heard so many things about Tinshu. Actually, like it was really huge for me, because one of the things before I came to Taiwan. My way of being exposed like to some of the artists and some of the things that were here was like the portrait series that you did on YouTube. So that's the way I got to know many interesting artists such as Jared Shu, Fang Yi. Like I got to know those people first through your channel. So that was pretty awesome. And then just after that, just getting there, seeing like the place was really awesome. So I wanted to ask you, what was your initial impulse when you created Tinshuo in 2016, if I'm correct? So what did you have in mind initially, like when you decided to like embark on that adventure, like of creating that space and offering so many great things for the community and for people who might be interested? So I just wanted to know like about the genesis of the of the project and the space.
Yeah, I mean, so it's run by me and Nigel, my
Sure,
husband.
sure.
Um, and we will be hosting artists because we've been hosted by many beautiful
Sure.
people around
Mm,
Europe, especially, and around Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. And so we know experimental music is a very kind of world family,
yeah.
and people will be coming through, and people have been coming through,
Right.
especially before COVID.
Hmm.
And we wanted to have a place where we could host people that, yeah, they can share. And we feel like Taiwan has a growing sound scene, and we wanted to share more deeply. So not just giving concerts, we
Hmm.
hope to give more than concerts.
Hmm.
So we well, firstly is kind of like budget limit. So we thought, okay, we found a house, we're living it, have studios, and have a space people could perform and run
Hmm.
workshops. So we took some months to find this house where it's big enough to host as a venue. And after started running it, we see it as a living room, because we were living upstairs.
Yeah.
So we see all the artists and the audience as guest, as house guest.
Sure. That's
So we see ourselves as host, house host, and that created, for me, that created firstly an exchange. So Ting and Shaw is an exchange of listen and talk.
Yeah.
And so we want more than just listening to experimental music, but also to discuss and to share in both ways. So especially post-concert, we try to really go into the audience and see what we could hear from people.
Sure.
In the first few years of performing in Taiwan, which was when I first came back in 2007, during those times, we also toured to Tainan, and was really fresh scene then. And people kind of are really curious, but they really don't know how to discuss or how to kind of like have a conversation. So people often ask like, oh, what kind of software do you use, or what kind of training do you have, you know? And so I get the sense that people feel like it's a very kind of high training music. Maybe like experimental music, people feel like I have to go overseas and have a degree of some sort. We did, but I wanted to break that boundary. So for me, it's like you just need to listen and find anything to make sound. So that's how we started, like kind of as an essential value to all the workshops. It is, we try to communicate with all the artists that the workshops is for anyone with any backgrounds.
Sure.
But you don't have to make it really popular in terms of like, but it can still be inclusive.
Sure.
So also any participants, they have their own whatever training they have, or whatever training in life they have. So everyone has something to share in terms of what they hear. And for me, also coming back to, we're making music, we're not kind of criticizing music. So we don't have to have the language.
Sure. Yeah, totally.
Can listen to music with your body, and anyone could share your experience of this piece of music you just heard. So we try to really convey that sense of we're interested and artists are interested. What was your experience to that piece of music? And it's sort of like a two-way. So touring musician can get a sense of that culture exchange, or maybe, I mean, some audience have super rich visualization, or even colors or memories that they connect to, or some audience are really interested in a particular way that the artists present themselves. And for me, like, these are all super valuable feedback to my practice. So I hope this could be kind of an exchange for any touring artists, as well as when they run talk or workshop. We really try to have more of that kind of collaborative aspect, not just give and take kind of aspect.
Sure. What are some of the challenges that you have to navigate over the years in order to keep Tingshuo viable and sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, we had a child.
Right. Yeah.
The second year, I was pregnant, and then we had a child, and we were like raising a child in a music venue. What were we thinking about? So I mean, she firstly, she was like stealing every show. Like every show, audience were just looking at her, not looking at the show.
Oh,
So
really? Come on.
we were just like, you know, true. Like kids are so precious in
Right.
Taiwan,
Sure.
one of the lowest birth rates
I
in the
know it.
world. So we have to steal her off the stage. And then so we decided to also space out our schedules. So we were hosting like monthly events for the first couple of years. And then we were exhausted. So I mean, with anyone running any organization or anything, it is pretty much non-profit. It is very much like how we can balance life and work. So we also feel like as we got to know Tainan over the years, we feel like it's such a rich city, culturally, sonically, people, and diversity, and especially the historical and cultural connection.
Absolutely.
So we moved out and trying to have our space also hosting residencies, trying to have people stay. I mean, even any Taiwanese artists, they're super passionate about staying in Tainan. I mean, of course, the food.
The food is amazing. That's a good reason to go.
Slowing down, like people want space and time to reflect, and to reflect on their practice, to reflect on like method to have conversation. So we hosted a series of portrait as well to also, I mean, over the years we also focus on documenting and presenting Taiwanese artists, where we like I think we really see what can we contribute to the scene. So we have the skill of technical skill and conversation skill. So we try to like maybe really foster that on the online presence, and also translating many artists' work. And then COVID hit as we started residency. So then that became other form of online collaboration. So we've hosted also still through COVID. I mean, because we're in the lucky Taiwan. So we hosted some Taiwanese artists to collaborate with Britain or Myanmar artists over the COVID period. And then we also hosted this portrait show, and also hosted just smaller Taiwanese residency. And then post-COVID, now we've started really hosting ongoing. We have 4 commissions coming out at the end of the year of female and non-binary artists. And that's created over the last 2 years, and on and off residency in our space, but also more seeing ourselves as also producers, to try to foster some research that is based in Tainan and work presented online. And then other residency projects are more mainly self-funded international artists. So people can come to Tainan, and we try to connect them to the wonderful culture and people here, so they could really experience any research or project that is non-outcome based. So this could be a process driven and changing every day kind of residency.
You know how to present something at the end to say, okay, this is what I did. Yeah, sure.
I mean, for many people, especially international artists, like I think it takes a while to just adjust to the moisture. The moisture of the body. Like people are like sweating every day. And we've hosted also many environmental conscious artists to start with. I try not to use the air conditioning, and we're like, that's like, I respect it.
It's gonna be tough.
How you go. And like people adjusting like the adventure mode like in the first few weeks. So we noticed so much to explore just culturally, and then kind of digesting that into products, or into projects. Yeah,
just an experience that you take with you, and that's it.
Yeah, and like some people do present something at the end. Some people do also continue to make it into albums or make it into something else after. So we've seen many albums that came out of the residency we hosted the last year, which is really wonderful.
So I wanted to ask you one more question. So as I told you before, well, I've been here for 1 year essentially, and honestly my experience couldn't have been any better. Really. I mean, it's in terms of like having chances to meet people, making connections, being able to play regularly, even like releasing some of my music. I mean, I cannot complain at all. It's been such a great experience. And this is something that because as I told you before, I've lived in different places in Europe and some other parts of the world, and that was not the case at all, unfortunately. It was my experience. I'm not saying it's the same for everybody, but speaking from my own point of view, it was certainly like that. So you told me you returned to Taiwan in 2007, if I'm correct. So what do you think Taiwan, and there's a lively scene like in many different places. So what do you think Taiwan has, and people in general has done right for these things to happen?
So this is the tourism ambassador bit.
No, sorry, I don't want to. I don't want to sound like that at all. Sorry. I just it's honestly my experience, and I felt like welcome, and I had so many chances like to. So I just want to, like, from more like an insider perspective, and you're obviously part of that with your space and the things that you do. So I wanted to know, because I'm curious.
I mean, experimental music is still very small, I would say, in the music scene in Taiwan. I mean, probably will be forever in the world. But for sure, like, there are different aspects of Taiwanese that perhaps, like what you described, that create a positive experience, is that accepting, very, very accepting, I think, from my experience of
totally
the audiences. Like so I was back in Taiwan 2007, but then I left again. Second trip, 2010. But during the first, like, 2007 to 2010, I hosted some pretty big public gigs in the Taichung Museum. Museum of the Fine Art of Taiwan, and we've had like hundreds of people sitting outdoor for very strange experimental gigs.
Really?
And in 2007, and I wasn't the first one. Like, they've hosted many kind of more musical gigs in the past.
Right.
And for me, like, just watching the audiences, I'm like these are really accepting and super open audience. Like, people didn't like cover their ears, people didn't like walk away, people are just like, many people are actually just walking. It's a big park,
right?
So maybe some people are even just walking their dog, and some people are like, it's like almost like a busking concert, but it is like set up full stage. And many people with children, some elder people. Like, I guess Taiwan is geographically, it's taking a lot of influences from many different places, and we are still quite new to the country too. The Han people, that main population, Han people, only 300 300-400 years. For many families are younger, 200 years or less than 100.
Sure.
So people are still very much, I see that people are still very much kind of exploring what this land has as potential.
Yeah.
And I see like, like pearl milk tea is like very Taiwanese culture. Like you mix this in, mix that in, and it's great. We could
It
still
works.
like it's sort of this mixed culture. You put
Yeah.
like that on stage. Yeah, we'll take it, like it's fine. Like anything is acceptable and anything is okay as long as someone presents it, and the conversation, I think people are still trying to understand and comprehend, but people will sit there and listen for sure. And there are many dedicated organizers all throughout the country, including your hosting Hsinchu, like hosting many opportunities, as well as other hosts. And many of us are single people, like 1 or 2 people working. We take money jobs from somewhere else, but like many people are like super dedicated and generous host. So yeah, I guess there's still beautiful drive and passion there. Feel like it's still a young scene and it's still full of energy. And like you introed, there was a long martial law. So this new freedom, I mean, even, it's still, I mean, I've grown up really free, super free. But, with every government change, there's still a threat there. There's still a danger there that we, see in Hong Kong now. Like we treasure this freedom. We treasure expressions. We treasure opportunities for any kind of this experimentations. So I would say, like many of these cultural, historical, geographical reasons that we are a healthy scene. That is very communal, and help each other and try to be generous and diverse.
It's incredible. I mean, I really think this is the most precious thing you can have, certainly. So something to be grateful for, certainly. All right, so just to wrap things up, I won't rob any more of your time. I just wanted to ask you what kinds of projects you have coming up. I remember you sent me, when I contacted you, a link to a concert. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend it, but I still reminded. So what was that particular event about? Because I was having a look pretty interesting. So could you tell me a bit more about this?
So maybe that was a collaboration with Pot Plants.
There you go. That's one. Yes, that's the one.
So yeah, we just performed in Taipei. It's a collaboration with actually 2 dancers. It's mainly their project. Singapore maker, Daniel Koch, and Australian choreographer Luke George. And it's difficult to call them dancers because in this show they're choreographing 100 pot plants through the audience and stage, and we are all pot plant movers, and me also being the pot plant sounder. So like Nigel and I made the music and I perform live, and Nigel's music is pre-recorded, and we Yeah, the show is I mean, the show is still touring, so maybe some people will have opportunity to see it. So maybe I won't say too much. I mean,
Okay,
I
okay.
would say it's like we're starting to call it. It's an opera for the plants, and I see it as an opera because it's a disaster. It's tragic. It's very much connect to what's happening to human and nature and our connection to nature or our trying to connect to the nature, but also what's kind of like irreversible situation that we're living in. But the show doesn't kind of lecture as such. Like
Sure.
the show very much take us to an embodiment of watching the pot plant and seeing the pot plant perform and seeing the diversity of nature and then experiencing what they're experiencing through stage effect. So sound, lights, smoke and movement and all kinds of theatrical devices. And it's very dramatic show to perform, over 90 minutes. So it's a very physical task for me, but very beautiful to perform as well. Very emotional and beautiful. And yeah, like there's sort of many different small things I'm doing now. Probably I've been through more working with groups. Like last in July, I was helping a choreographer from France who are also a wheelchair user, and so she was leading a workshop in Kaohsiung for kind of inclusive audience. And so I helped her with her access need in Taiwan, which is super challenging.
A challenge, yeah.
And then also with class translation and communication. And that was a really beautiful 5-day of working through with a very diverse group of people about different relationship to time, about there's a disability theory term called crib time. So it is about disability, people with disability experience time and the need of time very differently, but also can apply to anyone because we have that diversity of needs. So it is about slowing down, about accepting your own need to any rest and respite whenever that your body needs, respect that. And so like sometimes being through some of this like make me reflect a lot about like what we are actually doing on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
And it is really difficult to change that, even on a day-to-day when we're raising a 6-year-old first week to primary school and just like all the time kind of like rushing her, hurry up, and she's living in the moment, constantly distracted, like being a professional child, like focusing on this. Well, I can't actually hear you. I'm actually concentrating on this.
Something else,
like, and it's so difficult to kind of situate in someone else's experience of senses and time, and kind of like to put any of this beautiful art practice back in every day to connect to nature, to respect time and body, is I mean it's beautiful but also challenging always.
We just have to trying. No, it's difficult, but it's a task well worth pursuing, certainly. Okay, Alice. So thank you so much for your time. It was such a fantastic conversation. So I hope you have a very fulfilling and interesting projects for the future. Also with Nigel and your child. Wish you all the best. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for making this happen.